You've built this incredible brand, an amazing following. Graham Tuttle, thank you for coming on the Athletes Podcast, also known as the Barefoot Sprinter, which is an incredible feat to have accomplished this, build this following. How do you amass 300,000 people who want to consume your content on a daily basis based off of such a primal barefoot sprinting?
I guess you probably have to ask them. That wasn't a following. And it was interesting because I think for a long while it was just Graham Tuttle. It's just was kind of figure things out. And I have thought about this idea of like the pseudonym, like Batman, Superman, Joker. Like at some point, there's like a message that you have that's valuable, that I guess you perceive to be valuable, that you want to share with people. And in some capacities, like the barefoot sprinting is something. Most of the ideas I've ever come into have been suggested or offhand topics that someone would have said, like, "Oh, yeah, I've got one of my longtime coaches and good friends is, he pointed out, like, I would just post videos of me going, and I'm originally from North Carolina, went to school at Chapel Hill. So one of the perks of living, I used to hate living on campus right after I graduated because I spent a few years waiting tables, and well, it was about 2 years waiting tables and just starting off as a part-time coach because, just you have no free to if you want to work in the fitness industry, you have to start at the bottom and build your way back up. And so while I was there, I was like waiting tables at the restaurant here at campus, and I hated it because I'm like, had to see people I know, and they coming back and like haven't gone anywhere. But I stuck there. But over time, you kind of get some traction what you're doing, and it's like, wow, there's a lot of value being around a university and the fields, the tennis courts, basketball courts, and so I started just running and would do sessions on the weekends and just go with my clients and started running. And it felt really good to run barefoot. And it's like I'd had a lot of foot problems beforehand, like turf toe, Achilles tendonitis, plantar fasciitis. It was very painful and prohibitive of doing a lot of stuff. So as I started to kind of look at the feet and fix that, like, oh, I can actually run. And it's like, this is pretty cool. It feels good to run barefoot. So within that, I was like, all right, I'll keep at it. And so then my coach is like, hey, that barefoot running thing you do is pretty cool. And it's like, I was like, it would hurt my feet. It would break my feet if I did that. I was like, all right. So I just he's like, you should think about like the barefoot sprint. And so then after a while, as I spent some time down with the knees over toes guy, another pseudonym, and if that's the correct term for that idea, but he was like, I think that it's an idea where eventually it's like you want the message to be, if people remember you for anything, it's what's the message, what is valuable. And so ultimately the thing is just a reminder that the body's capable, like you as an individual. And it's tough. I mean, obviously being down in LA when you're in a concrete jungle where you can't see the ground, there's not much, soft ground. It's a different way you interface and think about the earth. But in many ways, you start to spend some time just like reconnecting with your body. You realize, all right, my feet are actually pretty strong and capable. And to be clear, I don't go run barefoot or walk around barefoot. I'm wearing, my 5-finger shoes right now, but it's not like I'm living this like very nomadic ancestral lifestyle. I think people fetishize like ancestral living a little bit too much. It's like, flushing toilets and, I don't know, air conditioning is pretty cool. So all that to be said is like, I think there's just a certain level of following something that I find to be so interesting and then living out loud. So to answer your question the long way, I think the most valuable part of, and I don't know another way to do it. I don't really, even though I'm on social media and like post a lot of content, I really don't spend much time on there. Actually, like just hate being on social media. But it's a part of just like living out loud, and like because the things I'm curious about just happen to be, I'm not that different from other people, and so it's like, oh, you're interested. My knees hurt, my feet hurt, my back hurts, or I want to run better, or I want to do these things, and it's just a pursuing of the things that I wish I had more naturally given and gifted, I guess, in genetics or whatever, I guess you want to ascribe that to. But, over time, it's like asking the dumb questions and just stumbling upon answers because I keep out it and share it, live it out loud. And then people kind of follow along and I think there's something they see. Because I'd say, especially some of the people you've had on this podcast are like real athletes, they're like phenomenal in their physical capacity. And it's for people, I guess, look at me and like, oh, the guy looks pretty attainable. It's like, because yes, I was not athletic by any stretch of the imagination, and I'm just starting to get some trappings of that. But I think the point of the following is that people see at least I'm genuinely living out something I'm curious about and interested about, just sharing, and then they can relate to that. That's what I would assume.
I love that. It's similar to kind of why I started the Athletes Podcast. We're curious. I wanted to still be around individuals who had like-minded thought process, or wanting to achieve ultimate kind of success when it comes to body athletic abilities. You bring up Ben Patrick, who most people know as knees over toes guy. What's the biggest thing that you've learned throughout this process of your journey? You said 29 years into it. what was that pivotal moment that got you to like, hey, I'm going to pursue barefoot sprinting and like looking at optimal health for my feet, knees, hips?
So, well, there's two parts of that, which is I think there's the performance side. Well, I'm going to bifurcate into two different parts and bring it back together. But there's the I want to get out of pain. I basically have my health back, and then there's the performance side. So there's let's call it, if there's like a zero neutral baseline, then there's what does it look like to go from pain, which is I'm in a negative performance where I'm like below my homeostatic baseline, and then there's I'm going to go reach my potential. So let's just say there's this like static neutral, there's like, hell, or like a miserable place where you're out of pain, you're disabled, you're incapacitated. And then there's your performance, you're like reaching your potential. Let's just say the pain part, which is interesting because it's like everybody, it's impossible to objectively measure pain. I mean, you're like, what is pain? Like how do you can't measure it. You can't like point to it. Your pain is different than my pain. If we both stub our toes, we have no idea if we felt the same thing, but it's also universal in the fact that like, we all know what pain is. So you can't rationalize away pain, but you also can't objectively point to it, which is a fascinating thing. And so the idea of pain is, I thought a lot about this as like, it's a contracting force. So it could be emotional pain, mental pain, it could be anxiety, it could be depression, despair, it could be physical pain, and we all kind of know what that feels like. But this stimulus is something that contracts your focus into like, it pulls you into like, I can't think big, I can't be grateful, I can't be open with my mind because I'm in pain. Like I'm being reminded of like the thing that I'm feeling right now. And so there's this brief moment of like, what does it look like to get out of that? And so there's so much that's wrapped up into that, for first it was just, I was 22, 23, 24, I spent a few years training because I just learned everything from bodybuilding.com, a T Nation. And, I ran track and cross country, and then in high school and middle school, and then rode in college. And those are all kind of suffering sports where you don't have to have any like athletic capacity really. It's just a matter of like, I'm just going to show up and grind. And so at some point there's the skill level. Can I coordinate? Can I be explosive? Can I jump? Can I sprint? Can I do all this other stuff that I got to my 20s, early 20s, like, wow, I would like to be able to do that stuff. But my body had been trained to be just kind of a quote unquote meathead for years. That's all I knew how to do. And so then, you get to the point where if you pursue the aesthetic at the just solely aesthetic, you can get to a point where you look good, but that does not necessarily mean you can do anything, versus pursuing the capacity, the physical capacity that generally means you look good and you can do things. And so trying to shortcut the route of, I'm just going to do 3 sets, 10 and in the gym, left my joints and my body at the point of the place where I wasn't functional, I wasn't coordinated, I was stiff, I was irritated. I had suffered several shoulder dislocations and ankle sprains. My back was always bothering me. The knees were stiff, like patellar tendonitis. My body just was like, I don't know exactly what's wrong, but something isn't right. And so that kind of was this underlying ethos of like, I feel like I shouldn't feel this old when I'm in my early 20s.
Right.
And the question of whether you should feel that old ever that's still up for debate. But you realize that there's so much about pain is limitation and injury that is a mental game, meaning, if you've ever had any injuries yourself or people listening, like once you have an injury, the biggest loss of that is this mental, I'm saying ignorance, but like this bliss of like, oh, I don't have to worry about my knees. But like once you've had an ankle sprain or shoulder dislocation, you think about it all the time. And so it becomes part of this identity. I have a bad shoulder, I have a bad knee, I have a bad back. And it's like, oh, now that identity shapes what you think you can do. And what you do shapes who you become. And so you start to see slowly but surely over the span of days, weeks, months, years, you become, I don't lift weights because I've got a bad back, or I can't squat all the way. I don't play sports because of my knee. And so then you become, I'm the person who doesn't do this or does do this. And so our thoughts shape our actions shape our physical being, our flesh, our sinew, tissue, our muscle, ligament, bone. And so that literally shapes who we become. And so it's insidious, but injury has this capacity of like shaping our physical body. And so undoing that is not just a matter of like, do this exercise or do this stuff. It's about like changing identity and changing the habits of things you do. So as I've spent the last few years really working at this at a larger scale online, you realize that the biggest work within that space is changing the limiting beliefs about yourself. And so they're trying to challenge that and accompanying that with the actions that would move you past that. So it's like a small accommodation. Let me start to move my feet. And so in some capacity, the lowest hanging fruit for most people, let's just say there's the main common areas. So like there's the upper body, there's the hips and spine, and then the feet and lower legs. And so the most common thing that gets ignored is the feet. And so you either dive from the feet up or you heal from the feet up. And in some cases, obviously the spine is of incredible importance. We're talking about back pain, but it's kind of like the way I look at it is I always start with the feet because they're the foundation of the body. So a building is only as strong as its foundation, meaning like the floor of a skyscraper is the most important floor, because if that's not stable, or it affects everything at the chain. And since we have a culture that's spent the last 50 years in shoes, specifically thick EVA foam bottom shoes that have a raised heel, narrow toe box, that stay inflexible, we've lost capacity with our feet. And because of that, we start to lose the ability to move the digits of the toes. And so this is where I think that the conversation goes off the rails, because people notice, oh, my feet are this. It's like, well, it's the shoes. My feet are not performing the way they should. Oh, my shoes are bad, and I'm walking around I'm sitting all the time. So it's easy to kind of like straw man and like point out all the flaws of society, and you say, let's throw it all away. Let's go back to the ancestral lifestyle. But there's a reality within which we need these things. They're part of the society. They allow us some level of comfort and ease. And you're not going to reach people if you just tell them everything you're doing is bad. You need to walk around barefoot. It's like, well, if you live in LA, good luck with that, because the sidewalks aren't always clean. So within that, it's like, well, how can we find some of this like step towards us? Like, let's open up some curiosity about the body and undo some of these things. And a lot of that starts with the feet, which is most people have a very weird relationship, where they're either really into feet or really disgusted by feet. And I think there's probably two sides of the same coin. But, if you've been wearing shoes that have basically suffocated your pinky and your big toe, you get to a point where it's like, oh, I don't even know how to move my toes. And so the analogy I always make is a forearm. So if you look at the meat of your forearm and move your fingers, you'll notice that there's several muscles that start to move and engage. Mm-hmm. Now, try to get those muscles to engage without moving their fingers. You don't. There's a different set of muscles. So there's about 26, if I remember correctly, muscles in the forearm and wrist, and that control and work through the hand alone. So those are muscles, same thing with the lower leg. If I can't move my fingers, I can't engage that. And so one of the biggest limiters people have if they want to lift weights, or we get active, they want to run, they'll have back pain, the hips bother them, the knees bother them. Okay, well, what sets the foundation of that? Well, you've got these dozens of muscles, hundreds of muscles, ligaments, and tendons that are wrapping around intrinsically in the foot and the lower leg, that if I can't even move my toes, they don't get any stimulus. And then when they don't get stimulus, they get dehydrated, they get stiff, and they get irritated. Then I lose ankle range of motion, my feet collapse in, and all of a sudden when I go into squat to try and get in shape, my knees hurt, or my back hurts, or my tear ligament at a joint. And so you start to see this up the chain as a problem that is starting to add into the overall mix. It's like, I can't even think about being healthy because I can't even move my toes. And so much of the conversation about health and fitness is about how can I get to the simplest outcome. I want to be healthy, I want to lose weight, I want to do this. It's like, well, let's start with a foundation. You wouldn't start working you wouldn't plan to be a race car driver if you didn't know how to drive, and fast driver's ed. So in some capacity, it all starts with, let me get my body, the alphabet of my body back, so that I can actually have capacity to, start to think about what my body can do. So I get the foundation, get the alphabet down, and go from there. And then you start to inspire some of that, like, well, what could I do? So, like, you see there's two paths, right, in a sense, but, like, ultimately the path towards longevity, health, athletic performance, it's all the same thing. It's basically just saying, do I have the capacity to use my body? And then training towards that isn't a matter of, like, well, I'm going to go do sprinting over here and then do my weight training and cardio over here. They're all the same stuff. You put it together. That's a more complex, integrated way, but most people can't even think about it. It's like, a better way of saying that is the top of the pyramid and the base of the pyramid are part of the same structure. But we've been taught that, there's rehab, there's longevity, there's health, there's nutrition, that's all over here. And then there's performance and sprinting and athletics. Like, it's all the same thing, but it's just the same. You have to work towards that. And so people feel so disconnected from even thinking about whether they could sprint or run or jump, because they can't even move their toes, their knees hurt, and their realities are different. So, it's a process of, like, pulling this back together for people, if that makes sense.
100%. So what are some steps that you would take if you were that first person? You're like, okay, I know I've been wearing running shoes my entire life. I'm like, okay, this is something I need to address. I started wearing toe spreaders probably 6 months, a year ago. That's been like a point of contention that I try and do on every night, throw it all before bed as I'm doing some stretching. What should the average person who wants to put an emphasis on mobility, longevity in their life for their body, what should they be doing on a daily basis, weekly basis, implementing into their routine so that it's something that is manageable, and it is something that a 15-year-old might be willing to do for the next 10 years of their life so that it improves the next 40 after?
Two good questions. One of which I think, so we'll use you as a case study. Well, first off, you would be banking that a 15-year-old could pay attention to the fact that they're going to be alive in 40 years, which is a very hard sell. I don't think we're wired like that way at all. But so for example, you wear the toe spacers. What was the original reason you wanted to get into that?
I was listening to guys like you, Ben, who were having those conversations around, hey, this is important to be able to move your fingers and your toes effectively. I identified that my feet were like a mediocre. They weren't great. They weren't horrible, but I'm like, this is an area that I can improve. I'm going to actively work on this every night. And it's something that, same with my stretching, used to be able to nearly do the splits. Probably not there quite anymore, but those are things that I need to continuously work on so that I can progress over time and get better and make sure that I'm protecting my body.
Yeah. And so then the alternative to that is, so the shoes you wear aren't horrible. Not my favorite by any means, but they do have they come to a point. So, the first thing is sort of identify that we're in the cognitive biases. So like I'm wearing toe spacers because I value my toe health, but then I'm wearing shoes that smash my toes together. So it's almost like digging a hole and then I'm filling it back up. Mm-hmm. So that's the first question it's like, if I'm talking to someone, it's like, how can I look at this person and say, where are they unaware of the things that they are doing that are exacerbating their situation? That's a good question. It's like, how are you propagating the situation you say you don't want? And that's a very valuable thing of learning coaching and therapy is like, where are you taking part in creating the thing that's causing you pain? And that's a very hard thing because we've been taught, and this is not it's not bad, but as children, we grow up, we're externally validated by everything. Like, don't do this, do that. It's like, okay, that's important because we're babies. We don't know how to manage things. We don't know to not cross the road. But eventually, like, we go from first grade to second grade to third grade to seventh grade to ninth grade, 12th grade. It's like everything's laid out one step at a time. And one thing that doesn't happen is that we never get the empowerment as an individual to say, well, what do you want to do? How can I self-guide? It's like we're just told one thing next. And so, the ability to set and sort of think about ourselves objectively isn't ever really like encouraged or taught. And so most people get stuck in a situation where they've got, they're doing one thing that's actually causing their problems, but they can't see it because it's it's part of their identity. So like my knees hurt when I play soccer, but it's like I could not play soccer, or running is the most common. People say, oh, I'm a runner. It's like, okay, but your knees hurt when the thing that you love is causing you pain. Why don't we step away and not do that just for a time to build up a foundation? They can't even think about it. So like that's the harder part, is that we're like this path forward is almost always like muddied by the ability of an individual to see themselves as an independent person that is actually in control of their body. So in that capacity, it's saying, all right, which matters more to you, having shoes that look a certain way or having feet that function a certain way? And it's not to say that they're mutually exclusive, because people are forced into like military boots, or like, let's say the fashion sense of a certain workplace culture is going to dictate some things. But as I start to look at this stuff, it's like, I look at a kid, their body, like a 10, 15, 20-year-old, they're still so plastic and they're still capable. And this is, it doesn't change when you're 40s, 50s, 60s. Your body is still constantly shifting and being molded to the activities you do. But I would look and say, all right, the biggest enemies for a kid in that they're playing sports are going to be the cleats they wear and the shoes they wear, because that's where they're spending 12, 13 hours a day, because they go from that, and then all of a sudden they're in, slides the rest of the day. They're wearing socks and smash toes together. So, people, to tie this back together, we've been taught to think externally, which is what will fix me. And it's like, okay, well, what am I doing internally? Like, what do I want? What do I value? What are my certain limitations? What do I care about? Because if I tell you should be doing something that you just don't think is interesting, you're never going to do it. So the way I look at it is that it should not be complicated or difficult to be healthy, to be athletic, to be capable. These are things that should naturally flow along with the constraints of life and the geometry of our configuration, that we should be able to run, jump, sprint. And that's where like the idea of sprinting is so inspiring to me, because I think it's like people see, at least I'm genuinely living out something I'm curious about and interested about, just sharing, and then they can relate to that.